Listen, O dearly beloved. I am the reality of the world, the centre of the circumference. I am the parts and the whole. I am the will established between heaven and earth. I have created perception in you only in order to be the object of my perception. If then you perceive me, you perceive yourself, but you cannot perceive me through yourself. It is through my eyes that you see me and see yourself. Through your eyes you cannot see me. Dearly beloved, I have called you so often, and you have not heard me. I have shown myself to you so often, and you have not seen me. I have made myself fragrant so often, and you have not smelled me. Savourous food, and you have not tasted me. Why can you not reach me through the object you touch, or breathe me through sweet perfumes? Why do you not see me? Why do you not hear me? Why? Why? For you my delights surpass all other delights, and the pleasure I procure you surpasses all other pleasures. For you I am preferable to all other good things. I am beauty, I am grace. Love me alone. Love yourself in me alone. Attach yourself to me. No one is more inward than I. Others love you for their own sakes. I love you for yourself. And you flee from me. Dearly beloved, you cannot treat me fairly, for if you approach me, it is because I have approached you. I am nearer to you than yourself, than your soul, than your breath. Who among creatures would treat you as I do? I want you to belong to no other, not even to yourself. Be mine. Be for me as you are in me, though you are not even aware of it. Dearly beloved, let us go toward union, and if we find the road that leads to separation, we will destroy separation. Let us go hand in hand. Let us enter the presence of truth. Let it be our judge and imprint its seal upon our union forever. This is a poem by the great Andalusian Sufi Ibn Arabi. It's the hidden treasure talking to you, talking to us. Love in its fullness, talking to you, talking to me, praying to you, wanting you to let him or her or it to take them, her, him, it in, yearning towards you. What if all our aspirations, all our pujas and mantras, all our meditations, all our friendships, all our dharma work, our going for refuge itself, were actually really coming from the other side, from the hidden treasure, wanting to be known in us and through us? What if it was really like that? All those things were really coming from somewhere else. One of the origins of these retreats, one of the sort of conditions that came out of the conversations with Subhuti that we were having, two of us were having, was a phrase that Bhante alerted Subhuti to before a Kalyana Mitra retreat. Bhante was very struck by this phrase, and very struck that the author of the article, Lama Govinda, had even used this phrase to describe Kalyana Mitrata, and Subhuti communicated this phrase to us. The phrase goes like this, and he's talking about what animates the Kalyana Mitra friendship, what it really needs to make it a real spiritual friendship or a real guru-disciple relationship. He uses this phrase: there needs to be the flashing forth of that all-maturing cosmogonic eros that introduces and continually sustains spiritual transformation. The flashing forth of that all-maturing cosmogonic eros that introduces and continuously sustains spiritual transformation. Kalyana Mitrata only really happens when there is that flashing forth of the cosmogonic Eros, flashing forth between us, descending upon us. I did a bit of research on the cosmogonic Eros, thanks to the wonderful Google. I found a book. The cosmogonic Eros is to be distinguished from the malicious child Eros that causes so much trouble. The cosmogonic Eros is the love that creates the cosmos, that brings harmony to the elements, that enables procreation. He's rarely depicted, but if he is, it's of a beautiful, naked youth with a bow and arrow. And when I read that in the literature that I found, the immediate thing it reminded me of in our context, maybe it's too quick to come to this, but what it reminded me of in our world is the Bodhicitta, especially the way in which Bhante has evoked the Bodhicitta for us. It's as if the Bodhicitta, like the cosmogonic Eros, is the tremendous creative force of love. The tremendous creative force of love, not procreative, but creative. I always love to recite the verses in the Bodhicharyavatara where Shantideva is describing, evoking the Bodhicitta, which he seems to have discovered or which seems to have arisen in him. And there's all this incredible imagery to describe the Bodhicitta and how it works and how it operates. It's able to be anything to communicate the love to living beings. And it's potent. The Bodhicitta is potent. Shantideva likens it to the quicksilver elixir, perhaps even the red sulphur. It seizes hold of us and it works, or we work it, into our consciousness to create the priceless likeness of the jewel of the jinas. This potent, powerfully creative quality of bodhicitta is really brought out very strongly in Tantric Buddhism. In Tantric Buddhism, they identify bodhicitta with semen, and it's not to be squandered. I remember when I was a youngster, 17, 18, 19, when I was 19, not long ordained, I was a big fan of Mr. Chen's little booklets that were around, that were given in talks to Bhante. And Mr. Chen talked quite a lot about Vajra love, as he called it, and how you really mustn't lose the bodhicitta. And by bodhicitta he meant not losing semen. And he said there's a wonderful little book called The Yoga of Daily Life, and he said there's a particular time in the early morning where the blood runs down to, your organ, and that's a really dangerous time where you can really lose the bodhicitta. And I read all this with great seriousness and avidity, and he recommended a particular visualization practice so that you wouldn't squander this precious bodhicitta. You had to imagine your organ as a vajra and imagine it retracting inside you. It would then touch the syllable rung, the syllable of fire, in your navel area. That would all turn into light, and you would dissolve into the light of the primal awareness, the primordial void. So I read this, very intrigued, and I was on solitary retreat, and I was in a sort of semi-waking state, and this started to happen. It was early in the morning, the energy was going downstairs, and I spontaneously went into this visualization of this great big vajra coming up into me, and then I got so terrified I forced myself out of sleep into a state of mania. Anyway, so don't do this at home, folks. The real meaning, of course, I think what the Tantra isn't really, I think, talking about literal semen. Well, they probably are, but they really mean it's something much more subtle that brings about its transformation, its retention, its drawing in, brings about the flowering of consciousness. All this stuff about chakras, the wheels, the lotuses. Really, I see that as a metaphor of the flowering of being, the flowering of consciousness, that we're becoming abundant. Our being is becoming abundant through the arising of the Bodhicitta. It's rather like as well the Dharma Mega, the Dharma cloud of the White Lotus Sutra, that enormous, powerful cloud unleashing its rainfall and bringing about the flowering of the world, and everything growing in its wonderful abundance and particularity. Every single plant is growing in its particular way. It's very interesting. I seem to remember that before Bhante had his operation for an enlarged prostate, he did the Order Metta, and then he read the parable of the rain cloud. And he didn't say why he read the parable of the rain cloud, but I wondered if that was some sort of aspiration of his, that he was aspiring to become part of or open up to that cloud of the Dharma. Of course, it's not just about our own individual bursting forth. It's not just about our own rebirth. It's about the flourishing of others, of all life. The other day, a phrase from a seminar came to my mind. This is sort of happening to me a lot in recent years. I seem to be remembering things from long gone by, little phrases of Bhante's just sort of emerging, coming up. I can sort of understand a bit how the sort of terma tradition works. And the phrase was, beget the man you need. Beget the man you need. And I decided to track it down, and it actually was on my ordination retreat, on a study seminar that Bhante was doing on the shepherd's search for mind. So I'm just going to read you what he said. I was telling Lokamitra about a wonderful Sufi story. You see where I get my Sufi stuff from. It's from Bhante. I was telling Lokamitra about a wonderful Sufi story I read the other day about a guru and his disciple. The disciple had spent some time with the guru, and they used to have very deep spiritual discussions. But the disciple had to go away to rejoin his tribe and his parents, who were living miles and miles away. The disciple was very unhappy, thinking that he wouldn't have any more of the spiritual discussions that he used to have with his teacher. He spoke to the teacher about this and said how unhappy he felt. But the teacher said, beget the man you need. He didn't mean physically beget, but produce a pupil, produce a disciple to whom you can relate, someone of the same degree of awareness as yourself. So the teacher sent his disciple off and he said, beget him. This is what you have to do. Supposing you are an order member and you have to go off somewhere, you find yourself on your own. Well, you just have to get into contact with someone and cultivate him and develop him until he comes up to the level where you can communicate with him on your own terms. You just have to do it in your own interests, as it were. You need someone to communicate with. Beget the man you need. It's very interesting. Thinking about it, reflecting about it, I discovered that really that's what happened on my ordination retreat. I was begotten, I would say. And I would say that, yes, there was the flashing forth on that retreat of the all-maturing cosmogonic Eros that introduces and continually sustains the process of spiritual transformation. I tracked down the origins of Bhante's reference. It goes back to a great North African Sufi who, in the description of it in the text, the disciple is really quite pained and feeling rather sorry for himself. And the teacher, the sheikh, just cuts across and just says, you must beget them. You must beget them, not just one, but many. And the begetting in particular is referring to initiation, the entry into a new life. What the sheikh is telling his disciple to do is you must go there, You must beget them through initiation, through preparing them to enter the path, enter the life. So I would say yes, the cosmogonic Eros was present on that weekend retreat. There was, in my experience, a tremendous energy that arose, particularly in the private ordination. Started off in the private ordination, particularly associated with the mantra and the naming. In fact, an overwhelming energy. And it really did overwhelm me, but especially afterwards. And I would say that energy just flowed on, and I would say that energy has sustained me. And Bhante himself really had a kind of quality of delight that weekend. You could tell that he was just filled with pleasure in ordaining Ratnaguna and myself. I mean, I know that as well because he sent me a card afterwards telling me that to meticulously, verbatim transcribe the seminar without missing out any or cough. He's very particular about that. But also implying that, through the message on the card, that the 3 jewels were now my first love, and saying at the end of the postcard, what a perfect weekend. But you could tell his delight in that weekend. He was all dressed up, not just in his robes, but he was wearing a special, Tibetan shirt, a sort of orange Tibetan shirt. And when somebody remarked on, they'd never seen him dressed like this, and he said, well, as Richard, as I then is into things Tibetan, I thought I ought to dress up. Wink, wink, flashing of eyes and all that sort of thing. He really knew how to kind of hook me in, showing me his beads from Mr. Chen that Mr. Chen gave him for certain practices. But not just his delight in me and Ratnaguna, but his delight in everybody, in all of the disciples present on that weekend, this lovely high summer's day at weekend, 1976 summer. And the text, the Shepherd's Search for Mind, Milarepa, teaching this young 16-year-old illiterate shepherd, begetting him through the teaching, pointing to the nature of mind itself, awareness itself. And I can remember when we were going through the material, we were having this, Bhante was dialoguing with us. Sagramati, you were there, I think. He was, getting us to question him, getting us to think about mind. At one point he said, don't take my word for what's being said here. Use your minds, think, see for yourself. And I can remember there was one moment where he suddenly said, you can't know the mind. And in that moment, I was so thrilled. I didn't know what he was talking about. I've gone back to the seminar to try and get the atmosphere. But in that moment, there was the thrill of illumination. And the cosmogonic Eros brings a maturing. I'm someone who came to our order with very little education. I was more or less thrown out of school at 16. I was pretty much unteachable. Very little education, very little culture, hardly any life experience, when you're 17. Unformed, adolescent, confused, but with at least a kind of longing, an imperative. I have been begotten, I would say, by the order. I have been begotten by Bhante. I can remember the time he told me he would ordain me. We were in a house in Brighton, and just the two of us in this kitchen. I went into the kitchen, and Visantra was there with Bhante, and Visantra said, I've got to do things now. And I was alone with Bhante in his plum-coloured suit and his orange DMs, sort of oxblood DMs. It was that era of sartorial elegance. And I was making him his breakfast, and he just looked at me with this, a very particular sort of smile he had in those days. I can't really describe it, but he said, by the way, I've decided to ordain you. And I just went into sort of shakes and spilt the tea and burnt the toast, and he could see he was really enjoying my discomfort. And I said, I don't know what to say. I said, you don't need to say anything. And he said, you don't have to go through things in order to lead a spiritual life. You don't need to go through it all. Probably knowing very well that I would go through it all. That I wasn't becoming a monk or anything like that. And then he said an interesting thing. He said, young people have a lot to offer the order. 19 was young in those days. Late 20s was old in those days. And of course what he said then is true now. But I remember in that moment of him seeing me, affirming that, taking me more seriously really than I even took myself, that I could even take myself. I think that was a moment of begetting, if you like. I've been so enriched and matured by Bhante. Bhante is my educator. All those lectures and seminars, they're not just to do with Dharma. There's literature, poetry, art, music. He'd reference something, and I just want to go and follow it up, and it would lead to something else and something else. And life, all the different, worlds and environments, and this word institution that we use, that I've participated in. And of course, it's not been at all smooth, and it's not been pure, and I haven't been pure. So many failures on my part, so much impurity, so many false starts. But definitely, I would say, a learning, a maturing, and of course, not just Bhante, but my Kalyana Mitras. When I was first involved in the movement, yes, I was young, I was naive. I thought that all order members were bodhisattvas. I mean, they had those names: Subhuti, Siddhiratna, Sagramati, Abhaya, Srimala. These are my seniors. They were all, I just assumed they were bodhisattvas. Of course they are. I really did think that. And all in one way or another they were my educators. I remember doing silkscreen work, helping Siddhiratna do silkscreen printing way back in the day in the 70s, watching him and Anuttara make these silkscreens to do fly posting all around North London. Well, I learnt something that day. Sagramati's talks and seminars, Abhaya's talks, Srimala's mysterious presence, and Subhuti, of course. Subhuti, my goodness. I'm still being educated. I mean, Subhuti is so much I run on from Subhuti from years ago. I mean, we wouldn't even be doing this retreat if it wasn't for Subhuti. I mean, Subhuti, creates so much, so much. So easy to take it for granted. I wouldn't have had the courage to do these retreats without the flashing forth of the cosmogonic Eros between Subhuti and me. The Bodhicitta, love, the great love, the cosmogonic Eros, can only actually manifest between us, through us. The wonderful meditation that contemplation that the great Henri Corbin does in his reflections on particularly Ibn Arabi's vision of the world, and it's talking about the relationship between your what words are there, but the way the theophany, the showing of the divine that you are in direct connection with, and you. It says it's a relationship of lord and vassal. It's chivalrous. You need the Lord to be for the whole meaning and purpose of your life. He needs you to manifest in this world that can be weighed and measured. It's a dialogic relationship. And certainly it must surely be the same with the Dharma, with the Bodhicitta. We need the Dharma, we need the Bodhicitta to be for the life of life, the meaning of life. But it needs us to be active, to be embodied, to be unleashed in this world. And it is love. The cosmogonic Eros is love that creates the cosmos out of chaos. Of course, it's a very poor word, love. It's a very poor word. Do you remember what Bhante said of the love that is the positive counterpart of the first precept? He said, love isn't a good word. Maitri doesn't really tell it. You can see that he's going beyond language. He's trying to talk about the love that arises out of the vigorous identification with others, with all others. Not with the imaginative identification with all others as something really felt and experienced. He says, if it's a love at all, let it be a maturing and protecting love that has the same effect on the being of others as sunshine on vegetation. And it is a love that actively dissolves all conflict, the disharmony of chaos. It sweeps it away. Any last vestige of separation, any contracting of consciousness in meanness, indifference, unkindness, it continually expands and embraces more and more. It's hard to find a self and another in such love. As my beloved Ahmad Ghazali says, the absolutely true love, as it exists, is the edifice of holiness founded upon absolute purity and cleanness, free of all accidents and defects, and without any constituents. This station is beyond the limit of knowledge, and the elusive expression of knowledge cannot reach it. For here is the dashing of waves of the ocean of love, breaking on themselves and returning to themselves. It is both the sun and heaven, the sky and earth. It is the lover, the beloved and love, for they all are derived from love. When derivations disappear, all returns to the unity. But the last words really need to go to our own master, who tells it so clearly, so beautifully, this harmonising power of the cosmogonic Eros. A poem perhaps about two people, but really a poem for our whole order, something that we need to grow within this broken world. So love grew up between us like a flower, though neither made sign or breathed a word, content to watch it growing hour by hour and see its petals by the breezes stirred. At length it grew to such a breadth and height, it stood there like a mighty forest tree, with 1,000 glorious petals golden bright, and I could not see you, nor you see me. And so the flower for both is all in all, though each is in the flower in each, and each in each, forever, past recall. A mystery this, beyond the grasp of speech.